Hannah Reeves was the quiet girl from Leeds, the one who lost her best friend in a childhood tragedy, until years later, her body was found rotting in a barn, and her identity was being worn by a killer. Her twin sister, Hope Reeves, erased from birth and forgotten by the world, came back not to reclaim a life, but to steal it, one innocent face at a time. Innocent Faces, Blood-Soaked Truth, is the haunting true crime story of two sisters bound by blood, divided by fate, and the trail of educators, lies and ribbons left behind. Leeds, 2004. Summer had settled gently over the town like a warm memory, with ice cream trucks humming in the distance, and children's laughter echoing through cul-de-sacs lined with brick houses and blooming rose gardens. Among the familiar routine of peaceful suburban life, two girls stood out, not because they were loud or troublesome, but because they were always together. Hannah Reeves and Lila Marsh were inseparable, walking home hand in hand, trading secrets under trees, sharing sandwiches even when they didn't have to. They were the picture of innocence, a friendship untouched by the cruelty of the world. That summer they spent most evenings in Hannah's backyard, drawing pictures in chalk and pretending the garden was a kingdom. Lila was always the queen. Hannah didn't mind being the knight. There was something shy in the way Hannah spoke, always watching, always thinking. Lila, on the other hand, had a light that couldn't be dimmed. Quick to smile, quick to run, quick to laugh too loud. Adults often said Lila had the charm to be anything. Hannah quietly believed it too. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned syrupy orange, something shifted. Lila had stayed a little longer than usual at Hannah's home. They had played a new game that Hannah had made up, one where they whispered wishes into a jar and buried it in the flower bed. As they covered the jar with soil, Lila asked, "Do you think secrets grow if you bury them?" Hannah had only nodded, eyes fixed on the earth, her fingers still in the dirt longer than they needed to be. When Lila left that evening, her backpack bouncing as she ran down the sidewalk, she turned back to wave like she always did. Hannah watched her go. The wave returned, slower this time. Inside her chest, something knotted. A strange cold had crept in, unnoticed at first, something she couldn't name. Lila never made it home. When her parents realized she wasn't back by dusk, panic began its slow spread through the neighborhood. The community gathered with torches and flashlights, shouting her name into the thickening dark. Posters were printed overnight. Search dogs sniffed along hedges and trails. Helicopters whirred overhead. Hannah stayed silent, wrapped in a blanket on her porch, eyes red but dry. No one noticed how still she sat, how tightly she held onto her knees. 2 days later, Lila was found in a quiet patch of woodland at the edge of town. Her body lay curled, almost peaceful, as though she had fallen asleep. Her favorite scarf was wound too tightly around her neck. There were no signs of violence beyond the strangulation. No scratches, no bruises, no blood. It was as if someone she trusted had done it. Someone she didn't fear. The town reeled. Classrooms hung photos of Lila near the chalkboards. Counselors were brought in. And for weeks, the streets remained quieter. The police arrested a local man, a reclusive loner who was often seen near the woods. He had no alibi, no one to defend him. People nodded gravely, believing justice had been done. But the evidence was thin, circumstantial, no DNA, no motive. Months later, he was quietly released, and the case went cold. Hannah, now back in school, didn't speak much. She stared out windows and scratched strange drawings into the corners of her notebooks, ribbons, trees, two stick figures with their hands joined. Her parents chalked it up to grief, and the school tried to give her space. No one thought to ask what she remembered about that night. No one questioned the way she flinched when someone said Lila's name. Sometimes, late at night, Hannah would wake up gasping, convinced she felt dirt under her fingernails. She would lie still in bed, eyes wide in the dark, wondering what secrets really did when you buried them. Whether they stayed quiet, or whether they grew. Green Hill, Indiana. 2011. A town so ordinary it almost felt pretend, like the background of a story where nothing ever went wrong. The streets were lined with clipped lawns and modest homes, where front porches held flower pots and American flags waved in gentle breeze. At Green Hill Middle School, the rhythm of routine rarely changed, and that predictability comforted everyone. Until the day Ms. Anna Rhodes arrived. She was introduced on a Monday morning as the new substitute teacher. Thin, pale, and composed, she walked into the 7th grade classroom, wearing a navy cardigan that reached her knees, sleeves always pulled down no matter the temperature. Her voice was soft, and her smile was the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. But she was kind to the students, always patient, always calm. They liked her. The other teachers said she was a breath of fresh air. Anna, if that was even her real name, never spoke about her past. She filled out forms quickly, never asked personal questions in return, and carried a lunch she never seemed to eat. She would sit in the teacher's lounge, staring out the window during breaks, her hands folded neatly, her eyes distant, as if she were listening to a memory no one else could hear. There were moments, subtle, almost unnoticeable, when something in her slipped. Once a student asked her if she had any kids of her own. Her face froze for just a beat too long before she answered, no. Another time, she flinched when a girl hugged her after class. It was small things, nothing too obvious, but children sense what adults often miss. And some of them started whispering about her, saying she gave them nightmares. Her eyes were too dark, like something inside her had stopped working. Then came the fire. It started in the science lab after hours. The janitor found a small stack of notebooks smoldering in the corner, their edges blackened. Nothing else burned. When the fire department inspected the damage, they found a melted candle and strands of hair tied together with red thread. It didn't make sense. No one took it seriously. A prank, they said. Just kids acting out. But then, a week later, a girl's pet rabbit went missing from her backpack. The next day, it was found in the school dumpster, cut open with terrifying precision. Whispers turned into tension. Parents complained, and somewhere between all this chaos, a worn spiral notebook appeared in a classroom cupboard, as if it had been waiting to be found. The cover was torn, the pages filled with messy handwriting. Pages described dreams of children screaming, of fire crawling up walls, of choking hands and soft voices saying, "Shh, you're safe." At the bottom of each entry was a looping letter. The principal dismissed it as the work of a disturbed student. No fingerprints were lifted. The incident wasn't reported, the police. But something about the notebook clung to the walls like smoke that refused to fade. Anna resigned quietly the following month. No explanation. No goodbye. She packed her few belongings, just a leather satchel, and a single framed photo no one ever got a clear look at, and left before the morning bell rang. When the school tried to contact her for paperwork, the number she'd provided led to a disconnected line. The address on her file belonged to an abandoned farmhouse 5 towns away. It was as if she had never existed at all. But the children remembered her. Not in the way they remembered most teachers, not with warmth or nostalgia. They remembered the way she looked when the hallways were empty, how she stared at them too long sometimes, how she always seemed like she was about to cry, even when she smiled. One student said she saw Anna standing in the hallway mirror once, even though she wasn't in the building that day. No one could explain her. But years later, when her real name was uncovered, the truth would stretch further and darker than anyone could have imagined. Norfolk, 2015. It had rained for 3 days straight. The kind of cold, misty drizzle that soaked through jackets and crept under doorframes. The countryside was muddy and gray, heavy with silence. On the 4th day, the clouds parted briefly, just long enough for a sharp smell to reach the nose of a nearby farmer. He had come to check the old barn on the edge of his property, a building long abandoned, its roof sagging, its beams half-rotted. What he found inside would stay with him forever. The body was folded into the far corner of the barn, hidden behind a stack of moldy crates, dressed in a modest skirt and a buttoned blouse. The woman looked strangely out of place, like she'd sat down to rest and never got up again, but her skin had turned waxy, her eyes sunken, her hands still curled into soft fists. Her limbs had stiffened into unnatural positions. One shoe was missing. She had been there for months, maybe longer. The authorities were slow to identify her at first. There was no ID on the body, no phone, nothing to indicate who she was. But tucked inside the blouse was a tiny pin, a school emblem from Green Hill, Indiana. It was the only clue. Days later, fingerprints brought a name to the surface, Anna Rhodes. But even that was a lie. Her real name was Hannah Reeves. Back in Leeds, the news hit like a forgotten scream. Hannah, the girl who had once lost her best friend, the one who had grown quiet and strange after the murder, was dead. No one had even known she was missing. Her parents had passed away 2 years earlier, and with no close relatives, her disappearance had gone unnoticed. Her death had slipped through the cracks like she never existed. But someone had been paying attention. The detective assigned to her case, Laura Menzies, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. The way the body had been hidden didn't match a robbery or an accident. It was careful, almost gentle, like whoever placed her there hadn't wanted to get rid of her, but to keep her. The autopsy revealed no external trauma. Cause of death, undetermined. No drugs, no injuries, just nothing. As if life had quietly stopped. The investigation turned to CCTV footage, hoping to trace her last known movements. They found her at a London train station, 2 years before the discovery of her body. She was carrying a small suitcase, hair pulled back neatly. In the footage, she glanced around nervously, scanning faces. She didn't appear to be fleeing, but she didn't seem at peace, either. Standing beside her was a man with a scar under his right eye. He looked older, dressed in dark clothing, his face unreadable. She didn't look afraid of him. She looked familiar with him. That was the last image ever captured of Hannah Reeves alive. Detective Menzies kept watching the footage late into the night. Something about the interaction felt off. Hannah had always been a reserved child, not the kind to run away or vanish into new identities. And yet, that's exactly what she'd done. She had crossed the ocean, taken a false name, and buried her past behind a soft voice and long sleeves. Why? As the days passed, Menzies combed through files from the States. That's when the connection began to form. Green Hill School, the notebook, the fire, the dead rabbit. A pattern was surfacing, but it was too loose, too faint to define. Still, one question kept haunting her. If Hannah had been dead for over a year when she was found, then who had continued her story? Back in the barn beneath a floorboard near where the body had rested, investigators found something else. A child's drawing. 2 girls stood side by side, smiling. One had her hand stretched behind the other's back, holding a long dark rope. Underneath, in a scrawl that barely looked like a child's hand, were the words, "It was always supposed to be both of us." Something deeper had been buried, and it was beginning to surface. Detroit, 2017. A bitter wind coiled through the city's broken alleys and hollowed-out buildings. Years of economic decay had left entire blocks in shadows, as if forgotten by time, but something far darker than poverty had started to settle into the streets. It began quietly, as horror often does. One teacher, then another. Each found in different neighborhoods, in different states of decay, but all with the same haunting detail, their wrists bound with a child's ribbon. The victims seemed unconnected at first. A retired librarian, a preschool assistant, a substitute language arts teacher, but patterns always emerge if you look long enough. FBI analysts began stitching the pieces together. Every victim had been involved in education, every woman had worked with children, and each had been strangled with a ribbon tied with eerie precision, knotted so delicately it was almost beautiful. Like a gift. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no struggle. These weren't chaotic murders. They were practiced, almost ritualistic. Whoever was behind them had taken their time. Special Agent Rena Lively was one of the first to say it aloud. This wasn't random. It was targeted. She had seen it before. Killers who didn't just crave power or blood, but meaning. And this one, whoever they were, was sending a message. The deeper they looked, the more terrifying the truth became. Each of the murdered women had spent time, no matter how brief, at Green Hill Middle School in Indiana, between 2010 and 2012, and every path seemed to loop back to one name, Hannah. That name had already set off alarms earlier that year in the UK, when a woman's mummified body was discovered in a barn. The body had been identified as Anna Rhodes, but her real identity was Hannah Reeves, the same girl who had once been linked to a murder in Leeds as a child, dead for over a year before these murders began. So how could she be connected? Agent Lively stared at the timeline on her board, the red string stretching across maps and documents like veins. The answer had to be buried in the past. But the past wasn't finished revealing itself. A new clue emerged from an unexpected source. A defunct online forum once used by early trauma support groups. Buried deep in the archived pages was a user called Scar, a name that rang eerily familiar. The posts were written in a strange poetic tone. They spoke about betrayal, about innocence being a lie, about fire cleansing wounds. And again, one phrase kept repeating, "She wore my name like it belonged to her." Lively's stomach turned. This wasn't Hannah writing. This was someone else. Someone who had hated her. Digital forensics worked around the clock to trace Scar's activity. One login pinged from a motel outside Milwaukee, another from a bus depot in Ohio. The killer wasn't hiding in one place. She was moving, watching, waiting. When Lively saw the full pattern, her blood went cold. These weren't revenge killings. They were researchers. Every woman who had ever worked near Hannah, who might have known something, or simply reminded someone of what was lost, was being hunted. Then came the photo. A grainy shot from a Detroit gas station. A woman pumping gas, looking over her shoulder, her face hidden by oversized sunglasses and a scarf. But the scar beneath her right eye was unmistakable. It was the same man from the CCTV footage years earlier, the one beside Hannah at the London train station. But he wasn't a man, he was a woman, and she was still alive. It wasn't Hannah. It never had been. The woman investigators believed to be Anna Rhodes had only borrowed the name. The real Hannah Reeves was dead. But someone else, someone with the same blood, had stepped into her life and continued it, and she was still out there. Glasgow, 2018. The city pulsed with the usual rhythm of commuters and early risers, but for Detective Laura Menzies, time had slowed. Files covered her desk, crime scene photos, birth records, coroner's reports, screenshots from a long-deleted forum. Everything pointed in one direction, but none of it made sense. Hannah Reeves was dead. Her body had been found, confirmed, identified, and yet the murders continued. Someone was still walking in her shadow, leaving ribbons like fingerprints, haunting teachers like echoes. Frustration gnawed at Laura's mind like a slow, grinding wheel. She'd spent years chasing ghosts, but this was different. This ghost breathed. It moved. It remembered. And then, buried in the hospital archives under a corrupted file header, she found it, something that shouldn't have existed. Birth record, March. Name Hannah Grace Reeves. Twin, Hope Eliza Reeves. Her breath caught. A twin. Never mentioned. Never recorded in school files. Sealed due to a critical medical separation at birth. Hannah had gone home with her parents. Hope had not. Hope Reeves had grown up in silence. She had no family to remember her, no photos on mantles or school awards to frame. Her childhood had passed inside institutions and temporary foster homes, places that swallowed identities whole. Her social worker records were sparse, dotted with incidents, withdrawn behavior, compulsive lying, emotional dysregulation. One note, scribbled by a tired psychologist, read, "Creates imaginary sister. Refuses to accept she doesn't exist." But she had existed. Hannah had been real, and Hope had lived a life watching the world love someone else, who looked just like her. Detective Menzies imagined her, this girl in a quiet care home, curled beneath a threadbare blanket while news of her sister's murder case aired on TV. She imagined Hope seeing Hannah's face on missing posters, on headlines, even in death, more loved and remembered than Hope had ever been alive. That kind of loneliness didn't fade. It fermented, hardened, it became something else. The reconstructed timeline told its own story. Somehow, years later, Hope had found her sister. Maybe she followed a trail of articles, old addresses, whispers on the internet. No one knew what their reunion looked like, only how it ended. Hannah's body in a barn. Her name stolen, her identity worn like a second skin. And for a while, the world had believed it. Hope moved across the ocean, became Anna Rhodes, taught children, buried secrets, burned pain into journals, until that became too quiet for her too. Now she hunted. But it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about rewriting the past. It was about taking everything her sister had and making it hers. Her face, her name, her life. Each victim wasn't just someone who knew Hannah. They were part of the world that had chosen Hannah, the world that left Hope behind. When Laura closed the file, she didn't feel triumph. She felt hollow. Hope had been invisible for so long that she'd become used to walking through walls, passing unnoticed, but now, she wasn't just trying to be seen. She wanted the world to bleed for not looking sooner. Photos surfaced. Footage of Hope, in Hannah's clothes, smiling for ID cards, talking to students, holding their tiny hands, and always the same expression in her eyes. A quiet, aching hunger. The final piece arrived via a call from a retired nurse. She had worked at one of the psychiatric homes Hope had passed through. The nurse remembered her vividly, not for violence, but for silence. She never cried, she said. Not once. Even when we tried to comfort her, she'd just stare out the window and whisper, "She got the better life, but I'll fix that." And she had tried. Hope wasn't running anymore. She was becoming, and the world was finally watching. London, 2022. The city moved with its usual noise, buses wheezing through narrow streets. Hurried footsteps, the hum of 1,000 ordinary lives unfolding at once. But somewhere in the crowd, behind a face that didn't belong to her, Hope Reeves was walking unnoticed. She had spent her entire life being invisible, forgotten, erased. Now she moved among strangers as if she had always belonged, wearing borrowed smiles, hiding under the mask of Hannah, her dead twin. Detective Laura Menzies hadn't stopped thinking about her. Not for a single day. Even as the murders in the U.S. slowed, the knot in her stomach only tightened. Evil doesn't always make noise when it moves. Sometimes it gets quieter, smarter, more careful. And Hope, for all her rage and wounds, was not reckless. She was calculating, patient. That was what made her terrifying. The break came, like so many do, from something ordinary. A tourist uploaded a photo from Hyde Park to her travel blog. A wide selfie with the fountains behind her and people lounging in the grass, unaware they were being captured in the background. No one noticed the woman behind the bench. Not at first, not until another viewer, someone with a sharp memory zoomed in. A pale woman in sunglasses, hair pulled into a low bun, her hand resting on the shoulder of a small boy with dark curls. The woman was smiling, but there was something about the smile that didn't feel right. It stretched too long. Her fingers clutched the child just a little too tightly. It looked staged, like a performance. Facial recognition software confirmed what Laura already knew in her gut. It was Hope. Alive. And hiding in plain sight. They traced her through fragments. Security footage at a grocery store. A job application under the name Grace Holloway. A rental flat in South London. Small and neat, walls painted cream. When the team finally raided the apartment, they expected violence. Maybe a chase. Maybe a fight, but Hope didn't run. She was sitting on the floor of the living room, cross-legged, helping a child draw. The boy looked confused. The officers froze for a moment. It didn't look like a criminal scene. It looked like a quiet life. But then they saw the walls. Not the ones in plain sight, but the ones hidden behind the wardrobe doors and taped cardboard panels. Hundreds of children's drawings covered the plaster, images scrawled in crayons and markers, none signed, all nearly identical. A girl with two faces, one smiling, one bleeding, trees with ribbons hanging from branches, names scrawled in shaky letters, some of her victims' names, others they didn't recognize. In a single drawer, buried beneath children's toys, they found dozens of newspaper clippings. Every story about Hannah Reeves, every photo of her from childhood to death. Lines and words had been scratched out. Sometimes the eyes were scribbled black, sometimes the whole face was cut out completely. Hope was arrested without resistance. Her eyes never left the boy as he was led away. She didn't speak. Not to the officers. Not to the lawyers. Not even during her trial. She simply sat, calm and hollow, like a well-run drive. Psychologists tried to reach her, tried to dig into the wreckage of her mind, but she offered no clarity, only silence, only that blank, detached stare. Her notebooks told more than her voice ever did. Pages of carefully drawn scenes, identical over and over. In one, two girls stood holding hands. In the next, one was missing. In the last, only one girl remained, surrounded by ribbons. Hope Reeves had spent her life watching the world forget her. And in return, she made sure it would never forget her again. Not through fame, not through love, but through blood and memory. And behind every innocent face, she had left a truth soaked in red.